Action Plan Economic Development Committee. My name is James Valdez, and I use he, him pronouns. And I'm a staff member with the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. And I'm going to share my screen. I do have just a few slides, so I'm going to see if this works. And then I will put it in slideshow mode. Okay, I'm hoping that this is working. Yeah. All right. Well, some of you may have heard of the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and I'm going to use the acronym PCEF, or Portland Clean Energy Fund, throughout the presentation, even though the full name of our program is the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. And I work, and our team works in the city's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And I'm going to briefly cover just a little bit of the background of what the Portland Clean Energy Fund is, and then provide an update of our first round of grant funding, which we made just a little bit over a month ago, and then some of what's next for our program, because we're really excited about really the ramp up and evolution of our program. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund was created by a voter ballot initiative that was on the ballot in November of 2018, and really reflects the dedication and work of hundreds of organizations within Portland and thousands of people who volunteered their time to really make it possible. And what it is, it's a new fund that creates resources for communities to access that make investments in climate action that are really focused on both addressing climate change, but also advancing racial and social justice. And when this was on the ballot in November 2018, it passed by almost a 2-to-1 margin. Over 65% of Portland voters voted for it. And it really was a landmark in the sense that it was the first climate measure that was really led by and for communities of color, even nationally. There's been other communities that are now interested in this model, and we have helped to provide some guidance to other communities that are looking to do similar things. But what it does is provides a 1% assessment on the retail sales of large corporations that do business within Portland. And large corporations are defined as those that do over $1 billion of sales nationally and do over $500,000 worth of sales within the city boundaries, with some exemptions for necessary things like groceries, utilities, medicine, and a few other kind of exemptions. But there's an attempt to ensure that it's not regressive in nature. And annually, the fund is estimated to generate between $40 to $60 million. And this is an ongoing fund. So every year, there'll be additional revenue going into it, and we will be issuing grants and putting money out in the community. And so funds are accessed, or they go out to the community through this brief little diagram that I'll walk through here, and really just wanted to highlight that it's nonprofit organizations that are eligible to directly apply for and receive funds. And so nonprofit organizations create a grant proposal. We have a solicitation that goes out that we've done one so far, and there's another one coming, that really provides some criteria of what is eligible to be funded within grant proposals, as well as kind of how they're scored, or what are the things that are being evaluated in that proposal. Then there's a series of scoring panels that are people who are subject matter experts and community people, and then also us as staff that look at the proposals, and that ultimately goes to the PCEF committee, or this committee of 9 people who you see their pictures up here right now, and are amazing volunteers who are dedicating their time and energy to helping oversee the fund. And they also are involved in scoring panels and in reviewing applications. And these 9 committee members represent a broad cross-section of both racial and ethnic identities, as well as ages and genders of Portland. I'll say, for the benefit of you all here, that there is a requirement that at least 2 of the members of the committee live east of 82nd Avenue. And this was an intentional piece of representation that the ballot initiative put forward to ensure that there was a mix of geography as well as demographics throughout the city in the committee. Then the recommendation for funding goes to City Council, which ultimately has a kind of up or down vote. And we just got approval from City Council for the first round of funding just a little bit over a month ago. So the grant committee came up with a set of guiding principles along with community input on the guiding principles to really help frame what to prioritize in terms of the criteria for grants and how to put money out there into the community in Portland. And so that is to really at the core focus on climate action, but with multiple benefits, to be justice driven and to center the needs of historically marginalized populations, in particular Black, Indigenous people and other people of color and low income communities that have often been left out of decision-making and opportunities for resources in Portland, to be community powered, to really trust the knowledge and wisdom of community organizations and the partnerships that are built or that can be built in implementing projects, and to be accountable, to be transparent in the way that we do things, to take input and to be constantly learning and evolving our program and showing really how we're doing things. So there's kind of greater detail in these guiding principles on our website, but this is a brief overview of kind of how we're approaching the goals of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. So the ballot initiative that was voted on really created this allocation of funding that you see here and some targets. And so if you look at kind of the total numbers there, it doesn't add up to 100%, it adds up to a little bit more than that. And that's intentional to provide a little bit of flexibility in these funding areas. But the 4 funding areas are clean energy programs, which is about improving really the places in Portland where we live, work, worship, learn, and play. This is mostly about kind of improving buildings, I'd say, but it can be a variety of different types of buildings, a variety of different types of improvements. It can be energy efficiency, weatherization, critical repairs needed, or renewable energy and generating power in new ways for those buildings. There's also a recognition in the ballot initiative and in the funding areas that we need to really create new opportunities for people who have historically not been able to engage in the workforce or in the green energy economy, including women, people of color, people who face disabilities or who've had other structural barriers to employment. And so 20 to 25% of the fund is dedicated to grants for contractor training and supporting workforce development. There's also a 10 to 15% allocation for what's called green infrastructure and regenerative agriculture. So this is maybe in a simplified way, looking at things that are growing in and around our city, the infrastructure of plants that help capture carbon and potentially are involved in agriculture and feeding us as a city, but also could be things like street trees or green roofs or amenities in the street or a variety of different techniques and tools to both capture carbon, but also to grow things. And then there's a 5% allocation for innovation, recognizing that there's a lot of good ideas out there in the community that address both climate change and social and racial justice that aren't captured in those other pieces. And so there's an opportunity for that creativity. And as I mentioned before, we had an initial round for this year, but it was actually last year that people applied for it. It was a November 2020 funding round that just was finalized, but that was a $8.6 million funding allocation. And then for this fiscal year, for 2021-22, we have $60 million budgeted in grants. So what you're seeing and kind of what I'm sharing is that the program is growing, and we're really excited for the resources that we've put out so far. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But we are just super thrilled to be able to be supporting all sorts of different types of projects for both people learning and planning future projects, as well as implementing things and getting ready to actually build or create new opportunities in their communities. And so, some of this will be improving homes directly. Some is around, again, agriculture. But there's a lot of opportunity we've created for organizations to build their capacity and to grow and to get to know the needs of their community better to plan a future project. And so that's reflected in really the portfolio that we put together and that the committee decided on that was for this first round. And so we issued a total of 45 different grants, and they really kind of ran kind of broad range of topics. And I don't want to get it too much into like the details of each one, but you can see the allocation here. And I think what's important, and what I think Gail can speak to in a little bit, is that we issued 29 grants for planning. And so these were grants that could be up to $100,000 per grant, intended to help organizations get ready for a project proposal or for a future project. And so this is really an element of capacity building in the local community. And the East Portland Resilience Coalition was one of those recipients in this round. And then you can see the other allocation of grant awards that we had. We had 7 grants in the clean energy space, 4 related directly to workforce development, 4 grants related to regenerative agriculture and green infrastructure, and then 1 grant that was kind of straddling a couple different topics and was really both a clean energy job training and clean energy implementation grant. So it's kind of workforce development and clean energy. And so briefly, what's next? We're right now in the process of onboarding the grantees, those 45 grantees that received funding in this first round, and also coming up with ways to support organizations that are looking to apply in future rounds. And so that's part of my work in capacity building and helping develop resources for organizations to get up to speed on pieces that they need to successfully implement grants or apply for grants. And we have a proposed funding, which is basically now approved, of $60 million for the coming rounds for fiscal year 21-22. We also have a allocation that City Council approved, which is kind of this new structure of mini grants, or an opportunity for small $5,000 grants to go out for specific targeted needs on a quarterly basis for organizations that need to, for instance, attend a training that costs money, or to do some sort of event out in the community, or even to do a very small project that they have a vision for that they only need up to $5,000 worth of funding for. I'm sure this will be one of the questions that you have, so I'll address it kind of upfront. I don't have a slide for it, but we anticipate making those mini grants available sometime in June or July. And then the next funding round, which might be a portion of that 60 million or the entirety of the $60 million, that funding round is likely to be in kind of late summer, early fall, but I don't have an exact date for that yet. And then other pieces we're working on is just continued community engagement. You know, as everybody has had to, we've had to adapt things during the pandemic and move everything virtually online. And we've learned a lot from that. We've also, started thinking about how we transition back to, when safe to do so, some opportunities for in-person meetings or networking, or ways for people to, exchange ideas in person, while still maintaining the accessibility and some of the lessons that we've learned from this virtual space. And then there's other programmatic pieces that we're still working on related to implementing workforce and contractor equity standards for the grantees that did receive funding, as well as for some standards for future grants. There's a number of details I could get into. There are some wage requirements that we have within our program, but I'll answer questions if people have them. And then we're also continually, developing and reporting on our outcomes as well. And so we're putting up the framework for that to be able to really show both the metrics of success, but also some of the stories of how our program is impacting people's lives and really creating better communities throughout the city. And so we're just, in a way, getting started. We're onboarding the first round of grantees, and then also in parallel paths getting ready for the next one. But we're really excited for everything ahead of us. And yeah, we're really excited that the East Portland Resilience Coalition was one of our recipients in this round for a planning grant. So I'll maybe stop sharing so I can see your faces, and then I can answer questions. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand or just jump in if you have questions. Or I don't know how we're doing on time, Katie, so you'll have to.
Oh yeah, it's 5:40. How are we doing on time? Oh yeah, we've got well, yeah, let's see what questions people have. I guess I have a question. Are there going to be more planning grants?
Yeah, I don't know if the planning grants will be structured exactly the same in terms of the thresholds and kind of the expectations or not. They might evolve a little bit, but we anticipate, yeah, having an opportunity ongoing for that capacity building or planning activities. Maybe to quickly also address something that we anticipate changing. There were 3 types of grants that applicants could apply for in the last round in November. There were planning grants, which were anticipated to be for up to 1 year worth of activities and a maximum of $100,000 per grant. Then there were small grants, which were kind of implementing projects that could be up to $200,000. And then there were what was called large grants, which were also for implementing projects that could be up to $1 million. We anticipate, that we don't know the exact thresholds yet, that will move up, that the $1 million threshold for large grants will move up to, some multiple of millions. And those large grants could be done over 5 years. So they could allow for a project implementation of up to 5 years. That's likely to stay the same due to city rules around grant management and stuff like that. So 5 years is still kind of the out window to look at in terms of like the maximum length of time for implementing a project, or what we're comfortable saying right now, but the dollar thresholds are likely to move up. I answered a bunch of questions that you didn't ask too.
Does anybody else have a question? Because I just, go ahead if you have a question. Because we need to make sure.
How would we track changes when grants come available? You said June, July for mini grants, things like that. Is there something that we sign up for? Is there a website to watch?
Indeed, there is. I will put in the chat our info sign up sheet, because we do have a portal which you can add your email to and then receive updates about things like committee meetings or any of the grant funding opportunities that we have available. So let me put that in the chat, and I will send this link right here. That is the address to sign up to receive updates about PCEF. And we'll be tailoring this a little bit more. Well, I don't want to promise too much, but as our program builds out, we envision kind of having a mailing list that lets you be more focused on what your interest is and sign up for just those updates. But right now, this is kind of one sign up for everything about the program.
So one of the things that there was a couple things. One is that the reason I invited Neil here is because he's associated with a kind of a nonprofit that's kind of a bootstrap that does redevelopment, sort of small scale redevelopment by training people to do their own redevelopment, or training up people to be small developers, and kind of from the ground up. And so it seemed like it would be something. We've been kind of trying to chase different ways to get something happening in East Portland around that. And so far, nothing's really kind of clicked. So if we were to pursue that, what would a grant look like that was solid, a grant proposal that would be a solid proposal?
Hmm.
Is that a too big a question?
Yeah, I mean, it's also a little tricky because as a staff person, I can't,
Uh-huh.
recommend a kind of grant proposal to you. But I guess I would look at, what elements of your grant address kind of climate resiliency, or either mitigating climate impacts or reducing carbon emissions as one element of what you're trying to do. And then also kind of what are the social racial justice components of your program, and who you're making your services available to, or kind of what your focus is on community redevelopment. But yeah, I mean, also what I should have said is that nonprofit organizations can apply in partnership with for-profit entities or other nonprofits. There's opportunity for fiscal sponsorship to be part of that as well. But yeah, we definitely programmatically are also coming up with resources to support small organizations to grow, to be able to then implement projects. Maybe one editorial that I would say is that like PCEF isn't really explicitly about like land redevelopment or construction, but it can play a role in construction projects. But it's not just a fund to like build housing the way that other like Portland Housing Bureau or other funds exist for the creation of housing itself, if that makes sense. I don't know, Neil, if you had a specific.
Yeah, I'm just on the tail end of a project in Newark, New Jersey. We're a local CDC. We partnered with a local CDC that applied for a grant and received that, but it was geared towards small business training. Mm-hmm. And so, in a sense, when you think about training up small developers that are going to invest in a location, they now have a new small business. And so part of that was the business plan and how they're going to set their business up, but then also teaching the fundamentals of real estate development, which would be the work of their business. So rather than just looking at it as market rate developers who want some money for their projects, it was more training people of color to invest in their local community, and by starting small development businesses. And that was a really interesting project, and there's some really interesting activities coming out of that right now. So I could see it being real similar in that regard.
Yeah.
And so there's like a technical piece, and then there's like a hands-on piece. So with the CDC, we're doing some prototyping of how the zoning works, and what is possible, and then what are the thresholds at which price points get to be too much, for the local market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of contractor and workforce development piece could play a role there, in terms of training and building the capacity of small businesses to especially if there's kind of a green building component to what is being taught, or the lens by which you're bringing folks in.
James, could you talk a little bit about like what, obviously usually foundations have a pretty strong emphasis on an organization already having the capacity by showing that they've done similar projects, or if it's a big step up that they have, some safeguards in place. Can you talk a little bit about like I know that PCEF funded some very, very small organizations that were very much in like a, nascent stage. And so how that works when people are considering actually starting a nonprofit to address like a piece or try to apply for a PCEF grant?
Yeah, I mean, we are stewards of public funds, so we do have to, have accounting and reporting structures in place. So that will be a part of any grant. But we do also have the opportunity to help small organizations, and many of those, to what Andrea was talking about, small organizations that received funds were through planning grants. So there were also a couple that were project grants. And I guess intentionally, the PCEF committee isn't requiring a specific percentage of match or leverage in projects. At least that was the case for the first round. I can't speak for the future decisions of the committee, but that's one decision that really did help provide opportunity for very small organizations, because they didn't need to. They could put forward their project idea or planning idea and know that they could have resources to implement that without having to hunt down the other leverage at a specified percentage. And that was particularly true in the scoring criteria for planning grants. One of the other pieces that was highly scored in this round in terms of the criterion weighting of scoring was the representation of the leadership and staff of the organization compared to the priority population that the organization serves. And so this was a way to kind of really help elevate a lot of BIPOC organizations that are doing community work that are also reflective of the community that they serve. And so that, I don't know if that answers your question, Andrea, but that was kind of one of the lenses by which the committee created the scoring criteria that led to kind of that support for very small organizations. Does that help? Or
yes, yeah. I was just I wanted you to kind of. It's just such a unique kind of a thing for funding of this scale.
Yeah, it really is, because usually it's just so hard on these small organizations to have to pull all that together. Yeah, I mean the project itself is usually hard enough for them to pull off, and to have to go out and find other funding, it's just too much. Yeah, that is kind of neat. I'm going to have to. I think I need to. If there's not more questions, I'm going to stop this and move on to Gail's presentation, because JR, you have a question.
In the chat, there's a couple questions.
Oh
yeah. Sorry, I'm just seeing those here. So the data of how many of them are focused directly on serving the BIPOC community and how many of them are in the East Portland area. I actually do have that information, but not like it's not in my presentation. Let me, let me go forward. So
that was
80, what I would say is about 80-ish% of the grant funds were for organizations that serve the BIPOC community. Again, kind of through that proxy of serving and the leadership serving priority populations. Of East Portland, I did have this on so 2 out of 3 of the projects that were directly tied to some physical improvement. So either the ones in clean energy or the ones that were regenerative agriculture, 2 out of 3 of those are serving east of 82nd. It's a little harder in the 29 planning grants to separate out which ones are directly serving East Portland versus other parts of the city. So I only really have information on the ones that are like physical improvements that have a location, but 2/3 of those are serving East Portland. And anything you learned from the first round that we will do differently in our second round. There's a lot of different pieces. But yeah, I almost don't want to go into too long of an explanation, but I feel like, yeah, we saw some gaps of who we didn't reach and who didn't apply. In particular, we weren't very good at reaching people who identify as part of the disability community in Portland, or that were directly serving the needs of people with disabilities. And so I think one thing we learned is we need to do better outreach and have better accessibility in our materials. Also, we didn't receive any applications or fund any applications that were directly from workforce development focused at bringing women into the workforce, or women identified individuals into the workforce. And that's one of our goals as a program, and also a place that we saw a gap. And so there too, building those relationships and making sure that people know about those opportunities, that's part of our challenge for the next round. So those are two quick things that I'll call out, but there's a lot of learnings that we're continuing to have. So
Great. Oh, that was great. Thanks so much.
yeah.
Any last quickie questions before we move into an actual grant that was put in for East Portland? And I heard a little bit about this already, but I'm interested in hearing more. So
Yeah,
yeah.
And maybe one last wrap up is that we're continually learning. And so Gail, yeah, I would love to hear how you felt the process was too. And so I'll be listening from here on out. But definitely welcome feedback about how our grant process went for you. So.
And it's, let's say 5:54. So you can go to 6:15. We'll squish the next two agenda items into the last 15 minutes. So go ahead, Gail.
Yeah. So with the East Portland Action Plan, I do have a few slides. So I'll go ahead and share those. But before I get started, we built this coalition out of as an offshoot of EPAP because the Economic Development Subcommittee, this committee made PCEF, learning about PCEF, one of our priorities for this past year and this year. And so I attended a lot of PCEF community planning grant, the committee meetings as they developed the processes, and found that really very interesting and hopeful for us. So what we did—
interrupt for just a second and say it was all you, Gail. It was all you. You did a great job. You brought it up in the beginning. You made sure we were aware of it. It was all you. So I just want to raise that up and call you out as doing really good work here.
Yeah.
So, and then I'll shut up now.
Thanks so much. But so we got in early, and we wanted to be in early so we could understand the process and make preparations to make the most of these opportunities going forward for grant funding for East Portland. So, and then the other thing I wanted to say is, we did our best to participate also in public comments about the development of the grant process itself, and work on that. And I was impressed the whole time with the really thoughtfulness of the grants committee and the processes that the staff was able to develop and in consideration for the communities and how the applicants were going to be working. And there's a lot of support. If I fail to mention it, as a grantee, I think we're very well supported with training and a consideration on the part of the staff. And going forward, there's wonderful opportunities that we're looking forward to receive more specialized training while we're a grantee in design and development of ideas. So as a planning grant recipient, that's going to be really useful. And the other thing I want to say before I go to my slides is that as a coalition, we were very delighted to learn once the recipients of the grants were announced that we had 4 of our partner organizations in the coalition received planning grants, and 3 other of our partner organizations received implementation grants. And so I'll mention those a little bit. So we have this wonderful synergy and collaboration happening within our coalition going forward, and we'll have lots of experiences to share among all the partners in our group. So I'm going to share my screen and go out here to my sorry, I'm going to share this a minute because there we go. So what you'll see is I have just a few slides to talk about how our coalition is comprised. And we started our coalition to match the service area for the East Portland Action Plan. The 13 neighborhoods of East Portland that comprise a good portion of this outer East Portland area that was annexed in the late 70s, 80s time period. And so these neighborhoods are the ones that quite often have very intermittent sidewalks and very intermittent ways that the neighborhood zoning and configuration of housing and all that was developed. But we took for the Resilience Coalition, I should say, the definition of resilience that PCEF offered, the ability to withstand and recover from disruptions, and to have the community build systems that are less vulnerable to disruption and recover and adapt when disruption occurs. And so our 2-year mission, our 24 organizations, 16 of which have signed a memorandum of agreement to devote time and energy to this building of community resistance for a 2-year period, is purpose very generally is to increase the capacity of these neighborhoods and organizations to build community resilience in response to disruptive events like we have been facing, and to the opportunities to develop the community going forward. And so some of you will be familiar with this because I've given it a couple different times. So we received a planning grant for our coalition. So our project period is beginning, well, really in April till for 12 months going forward. The tangible product deliverables are prioritized project ideas and recommended projects for implementation and funding going forward in collaborative projects, and a particular document, a community resilience plan for the 13 neighborhoods. And the intangible benefits are to understand actions taken at the neighborhood and family level to mitigate adverse impacts from this past year and the year going forward, increase the capacity of volunteer-run organizations as part of our coalition to apply for funding, to further community resilience, and to improve the ability of our neighborhoods to work collaboratively for common goals. So that's, in a nutshell, what we hope to accomplish in our 12-month period for the grant. I should mention that our understanding, when we talk of within the coalition about community resilience, is that in addition to the categories of and focus topics from PCEF, we also are including in our discussion groups that are getting underway this month, the concepts in innovation and other of public health and mental health as part of how you build resilience for communities, and also the idea of community being a concept that we realize in our connection and our attachment to our neighborhoods and community areas that we consider our home. So our first task as we gear up to run our project, and we will be hiring a project coordinator who will help guide the project, but that position will work along with our other leadership, which is a 6-person vision team that is primarily BIPOC membership and representatives from our partner organizations. And then our fiscal sponsorship, because the Resilience Coalition has no legal identity yet. So we are fiscally sponsored by Rose Community Development, who is one of the participating partners, and our fiscal sponsorship sponsor for the grant itself. Long-term development, perhaps the coalition could become a nonprofit of its own, but that's down the road a ways for us. So how, just to get this out of the way, how any individual can participate. We have our member organizations, 16 right now, who signed a memorandum of agreement. We have 8 additional organizations who are affiliated participants, meaning that members of their organizations participate in our discussions and our meetings and our development of our project ideas. And then any individual person who's a resident of our 13 neighborhoods or who is very interested in these topics may participate in any way they like. We had our forming period last fall in our initial formation of the organizational things happening from January through March. And now that we know that we have the project funding, our activities for the rest of the year will be formulated around what we call topical discussion groups, which right now we are going to form 3 to start. One is devoted to the green workforce ideas, and we have 12 representatives in that discussion group. We have a second discussion group, which will be on regenerative agriculture and green infrastructure. And we have 10 individuals from our groups in that. And then we have a clean energy innovation and other discussion group, which will go forward with about another 10 or so people in it. And we're going to spend time over the next several months developing our ideas, exploring project ideas, and developing recommendations. And we hope to have that largely completed by the end of the year, and to spend the remaining 3 months of our project really refining, voting on, prioritizing, and creating that community resilience plan. So we invite everyone who wants to get started. I'll put these in the chat for anyone. East Portland Resilience Coalition at Gmail to contact our vision team. We have a survey and a sort of self-selection list that you can take if you're interested in joining any of the discussion groups. And we have a little placeholder website up on Rose CD and also on the EPAP website as we're getting going to communicate with our the community residents in our neighborhoods. So very briefly, one thing I should say about our 16 partner organizations that have signed the agreement, one of the benefits of being a partner is that you will have voting rights when we get to the refining and recommendation and prioritizing of all the ideas. And then those organizations have participation requirements that are as flexible as we can be, but the participation requires a couple representatives who can attend meetings and keep track of their participation hours. And then for that, they will earn a participation honorarium or stipend that can be distributed to them from various grant funds that we are accumulating for these projects. So if you're not a MOA partner, but a participating organization, you get to all the pleasure of participation, and but are not eligible for any stipend or reimbursement for in honor of your time and commitment. Except the glory of helping East Portland grow and develop. So I should mention that since we've gotten started, and even before we got the planning grant, East Portland Resilience Coalition has been generating some interest among various elected representatives and, of course, new city commissioners and various bureaus, including planning and development of the city of Portland, particularly the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, who is very interested because they also have interest in community resilience, to see what comes out of all our discussions and grassroots focus for our efforts. My next slides are a little bit talking about how, as we develop particularly the workforce discussion group, ways in which this workforce development subcommittee can work with EPRC to achieve common goals. And PCEF allows implementation projects, and we hope to have some great ideas come out of our discussion groups that would help take the neighborhood and family level focus and lens for people living in our neighborhoods for what we can do to improve the health of homes and businesses and housing for residents here, and combine our interest in public health and our interest in the quality of life for people living in our areas, to build healthier homes as a policy and advocacy initiative combined with the goals of PCEF. Also, one idea that was put forward by one of our folks so far already is to hold a joint housing and economic development meeting, policy points around how the work life and the development of clean energy initiatives under PCEF can help us build healthier communities in all the ways, from having more tree cover to having better air quality, both inside and outside the homes. And then another thing that's been coming up within the discussion so far is that training organizations that are already working in East Portland, some of them are already looking very closely at these ideas and will be involved with many of the organizations that are part of the coalition. And basically, our workforce development discussion group is going to be led by Celie Teckel, who is the director of Historic Park Rose, and then also James Matoyer, who works with Earth Advantage to help develop curriculum that can lead people to career pathways in green development. So they've already talked about the fact that one thing that can come out of these possibilities is that people who actually live in East Portland can perhaps offer or be part of projects that do this work and allow specific hands-on learning for students who are in workforce programs to provide residents discounted air sealing duct work or some of the other types of training that young people will be learning. And that the importance of hands-on, very specific training opportunities is important. So those are just a couple ideas. They're meant to prompt further discussion. And I want to go through just a couple more slides to talk about Earth Advantage is one of the types of training organizations that already does offer workforce training in this area. And I only bring up Earth Advantage because of the connection with one of the folks who's a member of the workforce discussion group and who lives in Paulhurst, Gilbert area. So this is just as an example of the type of green building accreditation and pathway to career programs that can happen. Earth Advantage has been around quite a long time in the Portland area and does training for green building organizations. Some of their partners are people you will recognize, like Portland Youth Builders that Rana works with, PCC, Energy Trust, Oregon Tradeswomen. So I bring this up because they're beginning workforce training topics are things like top 10 best practices in green building, green and solar careers, the Oregon Tradeswoman 2-day training session in green building, and a 5-day training, and then a scholarship program for their sustainable homes professionals. So it offers different types of training programs for a pre-apprenticeship through professional development. And these are the types of people who would join with nonprofit organizations to refine this kind of workforce training down the road. So more work can be done by EPAP's subcommittee to participate in the workforce discussion group underway by EPRC to identify activities and projects to address impacts on the neighborhoods, and to continue as a policy to foster development of collaborative organizational responses to create healthier neighborhood environments. So we have a great opportunity going forward, as James pointed out, with the ongoing cycles of grant funding, to take all these ideas, kind of do a prioritization and refinement, and then look for where EPAP and EPRC and some of these other organizations can develop combined potential projects, and focused on how East Portland, both residents and businesses, can benefit from the types of opportunities that PCEF brings to us. So if anyone hasn't already wants to know more about this, I'll be happy to put your name in the chat, and I will go ahead and contact you with additional information, and or if you know of organizations that want to be considered to join us on a more formal basis. I was going to just quickly flash to remind people our project leadership is a kind of a triumvirate of Rose as a fiscal sponsor, the project coordinator that will be hired actually as soon as we can bring someone on board, and our BIPOC 6-person vision team and representative of our organizations. And I'll just quickly, because this is on our website as well, some of our voting partners are organizations like Brown Hope, Black Community of Portland. They both got planning grants as well as EPRC did. We have the neighborhood emergency teams, which brings in the interest from emergency planning. Community Energy Project is one of the big implementation grants. Went to Community Energy Project and their partners. And we also have small business, Growing Gardens, Grow Portland. We have Outgrowing Hunger are organizations that also part of implementation, Growing Gardens and Outgrowing Hunger. So there's a lot of synergy among our partners. Historic Park Rose, as I mentioned, is part of it. Impact Northwest, New Avenues, Rose Community Development, Serendipity Center, and then affiliates are East Portland Action Plan Subcommittee is an affiliate. And so members of this committee who want to join these discussion groups, let me know and we'll get you signed up, because that's where a lot of discussion and energy and ideas are going to happen. Lentz, Powellhurst, Rosewood Initiative, Trash for Peace, Unite Oregon. So these are all people who are part of 85 representatives from these groups, and more all the time. So we're bringing a lot of people into these discussions. So I'm going to pause and stop sharing, and we'll go back to our discussions here. And if there are other questions, I went through that very quickly, but I hope it melded well with what James already told you.
Yeah, it really did. And it was more, because I listened to, you had a very short presentation at the last EPAP meeting, and I just didn't get it at all. It was like, I just didn't get it. And now it's like, oh,
It's complex.
yeah. So I think what I'm going to ask you is if you could bring like an update, like every meeting, just what's happening at the different groups, whether, if they're taking off, et cetera. And I'm just wondering there's going to be a lot of energy coming out of these groups, it sounds like. So I'm wondering how that's, how we can stay in that, and so that we're, kind of tapping into it so that we don't, compete in any way. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that has come out of the development of this coalition is that we don't want to move too fast. We want to, we've been working since January to develop the types of relationship with our partner groups and the communities they represent to make a comfortable set of and trusted relationships with discussing their ideas, so that we're not blocking any ideas and we have the chance to really bring forward the voices of the community based on their lived experiences over this past year, and their lived experiences in Portland, and how families and neighborhoods have actually been impacted. And so the ideas about how to improve what would make living in East Portland better. There's a lot of ideas we already know about, more meeting spaces. Well, okay, if the need is more meeting spaces, how can we morph that into community meeting spaces that meet all the criteria of clean energy and solar development and all kinds of things like that, and to make meeting spaces that really take our East Portland forward. So it's a slow process, and that's why we're spending, it sounds like, gee, a whole year. Well, that's going to rush by very quickly to allow people enough time to actually get ideas out there and explore those ideas and develop them fully, so we can make recommendations. So I think nothing will rush past you. We're going to try to do this slowly enough to really make it meaningful.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? We're starting to run out of time, which I'm so sad for.
Yeah, it's a lot of topics. So we certainly, like I say, drop in on some of the discussion groups. It'd be a good way to see how things are going. But
yeah, that sounds tempting. That really does. So any questions for Gail? Okay, I'm gonna.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm so impressed. Yeah, I'm just really impressed. So there's a couple of things that I did want to announce, though, and I think I'm going to do those real quick. Our second agenda item was that I actually set up a meeting with with Jeff Merkley's office. I mean, it won't be Jeff Merkley, but it's his aide. And Carrie Heron, it's really hard for me to figure out. I haven't talked to her, so I will know how to pronounce her name after I do talk with her. But we have an appointment with her on May 5th, which is 2 days from now at 3 p.m. And I wanted to see if there were people who wanted to be a part of that conversation, because Jeff Merkley's our senator. He also lives in the neighborhood, and he was instrumental in starting the East Portland Action Plan. He also is in the my majority now. So with an activist president that's like giving out a lot of money. So I think it's probably might be a good idea to talk with him and kind of update him on what East Portland's up to, and see if he's got any ideas of things that we should be applying for from the federal government. So so if is anybody interested in being part of that conversation? I'm hoping JR will be there. Yes. Yeah. So that's at 3 o'clock this coming Wednesday. Rana, did you want to be there?
Yeah, I'd like to be there.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that. So, JR, if there's other people that I should be talking to. So, Rana.
I'm just going to mention, if you want, since I got my new email, the JR Lilly 2 at Portland, I've lost a lot of emails that were in my old email. So if you could send me your email again, it'd be helpful just to make sure I have it.
I mean, everybody here, is that what
Either in the chat or just send me an email. Say,
Oh,
"I want
okay.
to attend," and we can loop you in.
Yeah, okay. So anybody else, is there anybody else that's interested in being part of that conversation? Okay, thank you. And then the other thing is next month's agenda item. I've got one idea. Are there other ideas for?
Before we move on, Katie, also,
Yeah.
if you're not able to make the meeting with Senator Merkley's aide, but you have some thoughts and you want to send it to me and Katie in an email, that would be helpful as well. Just, if you're tracking something on the Fed, especially if you're tracking something on the federal level that might affect funding for economic development or anti-displacement or anything like that, let us know. That'd be helpful, but just FYI.
Thanks, JR. Okay, so people know that. So the next thing is just what our next meeting will be about. And I have one idea, but I'm open to other ideas. The one that I had was the American Rescue Plan Act, kind of finding out somebody because that's money that's coming from the feds. I think it's going through the state and then going into I just really would like to know where it's going and how, somebody, I'm not sure who even I would ask to talk about that.
I think Kian has his hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I mean, like, if just to answer like quickly about Katie question, I think I can do that. So based on my understanding, with the $2.6 billion coming to the state, 780 million of them will be basically available to advocate for. So how the state decided to go with that is that they divided that $780 million into 3 buckets, the same. So the first bucket gonna be saving for future funding. The second one will be what you all know, that like each representative got $2 million, each senator got $4 million. So that's the second bucket. And
What?
The representative and the senator, they got to spend that money basically however they want to.
In their
and
district? Is that, you mean
the
like?
goals is like to be spent in district, but if they for some reason decided to spend it out of the district, which doesn't make sense to me, they still can do that. So it's totally up to the legislature to do so. And the third bucket will be basically going to the ways and means and the general fund process. So that one basically anyone can advocate for, but it will be most likely for the bigger project, like, you know, for example, like $100 million like housing project, or like $50 million land acquisition fund, or like basically like that one will be have to go through the ways and mean process. Or the $2 million, $4 million for that one, we still have to submit a proposal, but most likely whatever the legislature submit, it will get through. Another thing is that money have to be spent by December 2024. And each legislature can only submit 4 proposal total with their money. So I think that those are like some context. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, and I'm sorry,
yeah.
I have one quick last point is that legislature can also pool their money together if they want to, but that will be counted as one project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, is that when you say legislator, are you talking about each and every legislator? Because there's like the senators and the legislators, you know.
Yeah, so like each representative got $2 million and each senator got $4 million, and they can spend it however they want. For example, like I just want to give one example. For example, like I think like coalition of community of color asking for $4 million for the anti-gun violence like proposal, right? So for example, like we, Senator Jama, can jump in and like put in like $200,000, and then they have to go and ask other legislature to put in, but that will be counted at one proposal from Senator Jama. So he can only submit 3 proposal left, if that makes sense.
Wow, it sounds like you have to be pretty nimble and already have projects that have been put together. And so, Ken, how would you advise if we were going to explore that issue at our next meeting? Is that too late? Is everybody like spent the money by then? Is that what you and JR were talking about last time?
Yeah, that was what I asking JR about, like some ideas that we can spend on. So like you have to submit your proposal by May 10, but that money has to be spent by December 2024. So yeah, that's what we got.
Wow.
And more rules gonna be coming, because like right now the state doesn't know any, like the Treasury doesn't publish any guideline yet. So there will be more rules coming in the near future as well. But that's what we got for now.
And Katie, I can tell you a little bit about what the city got, if you're interested.
Yeah.
And how that.
I mean, it's 6:30 now. We're kind of ending.
Okay.
Is there a way to have a meeting about that, or is it just so it'll be over and why even talk about it?
I mean, I think that the interesting thing is that it's being split up into 2 tranches, which is like the first one is really dealing with the response still. So a lot of it is, I anticipate it's going to be going into programs that were already started up during the pandemic, like all of the short-term rental support and, I mean, not short-term rental, like short-term rent assistance and business assistance things. But then next year, they are going to be having recovery funding. So that is, I think, probably where we want to be generating ideas for, because that is more like long-term getting community back, you know, kind of recovered, as opposed to the emergency response phase that they're still kind of figuring out community stabilization.
Right.
I'm just thinking this committee is probably more interested in that longer term recovery stuff.
Yeah, I think so. And I appreciate JR getting in there and communicating right away. Okay, so maybe we could do that for our meeting next month.
Well, let me just Sure. What we can do is we can have a conversation about it next month and just invite some experts to tell us, like, by then, like, we'll know more of where the money's going. Like the state deadline is like, May 10th. So that's like coming up. So by June, we'll know where that money's going. So it could just be more of an update of like where we're at in the process. It might be too late to advocate for specific projects. But it can at least be an update.
I kept thinking that it would be great if we could do the anti-racism equity plan for East Portland, although it sounds like some of the stuff that Gail's group is doing is going to be about that. But it's like, if you don't have a plan, you don't have you don't have the projects. And I mean, basically that's what they're going to be doing, is coming up with some good projects. So yeah, I guess, okay. Yeah. Any other ideas about what we could do next, what we should be talking about next month?
Well, Katie, I was going to say that, of course, the coalition will continue to be applying for various grant opportunities to carry our efforts forward beyond the PCEF year. And part of that is, of course, focused on social justice and community development ideas. And so maybe having workforce development subcommittee actually devote just sort of our own big brainstorming ideas for potential projects that we would like to look for funding for, because having the project, like you just said, is really important before you actually apply for funding from anybody, be it other foundations or anywhere. So using the opportunity to really focus in on our ideas and plans that we could, not just for this next year, but on out a little farther, because some of these, of course, to make big developments will be long-term, multi-year projects. And so we're gonna certainly make our best attempt at bringing up these project ideas. But the more people who can be involved and be aware of those projects and discuss the nitty-gritty of them before we go forward and apply for funding, that's all good to work out some of that agreement in the community prior to going forward with collaborative ideas. So yeah, I think we should devote some more of our committee time just hashing out ideas further.
You mean for this meeting?
Well, for the idea, yeah, for this committee meeting, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Well, this was a great meeting. Thank you all. And I mean, I certainly got a lot out of it. Hopefully others did too. So I think we're kind of finished up. And thanks very much for these really great